Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another Three Nations Dementia Working Group webinar. Today's theme is perceptions and the stigma surrounding dementia. Stigma and perceptions surrounding dementia are significant. The challenges that impact individuals living with the condition, their families, and the broader society. Addressing the stigma around dementia requires multifaceted approaches, including public education, increased research into dementia care, supportive policies, and building empathetic, inclusive communities. By shifting perceptions, society can improve the lives of those people living with dementia and those who care for them. We've got a panel of experts to help us with this, and they will introduce themselves shortly. Your participation is not just encouraged, it's vital. Your comments, responses, and questions make this webinar a dynamic and enriching experience. Please submit your queries using the text boxes at the bottom, because if you raise your hand, we can't see you, and that would be a shame. It's essential to use these text boxes, as we will monitor the text boxes for any questions and address them as we proceed. I wanted to take note that all our webinars are created, produced, and presented by individuals living with dementia. While we cannot handle individual queries, we are here to support you. We will try to guide through the text boxes on where you can get help, ensuring you feel secure and confident in your journey with dementia if you have a diagnosis. As I said earlier, we've got a panel to help us with this webinar this morning, and it's my pleasure to introduce our first member of the panel, who is Dr. Keith Oliver from Kent, a long-time friend and colleague. Good morning, Keith.
Good morning, Nigel. Well, thank you for that splendid introduction this morning. And yes, it's great to be here with you all this morning, speaking about this very important issue, which so many of us sadly live with in our society today. As Nigel says, I live in Canterbury in Kent, although from my accent, you'll see that I'm not a man of Kent originally. I was from Nottingham and lived in the Midlands until I was in my early 20s when I moved south. So sitting here in Canterbury today, I'm able to join you on Zoom for this webinar. Looking at stigma, first of all, what I decided to do in preparing what I was going to say today, I did the usual Google search. And it was interesting to see that putting into the search engine the word stigma and dementia, I saw that there were 713,000 results. Well, you'd be delighted to know I didn't look at all of those. But what I did do was dip in. And it was interesting that the vast majority of those articles, pieces, talks, films were pre-COVID. And indeed, this morning, what I'm going to say to you, I wrote pre-COVID. So the first part of my talk, which is me outlining my views on stigma, actually comes from a talk I did almost 10 years ago today to a UK Dementia Congress. And I just wonder how much has changed in those 10 years. And I'll pick that up in the final few minutes of my slot. So here we go then. Whether real or perceived, stigma is a very significant issue and concern for many people affected by dementia, both those living with it and those living with us. Today, it may be that you will agree with my points, but what matters more to me is that I stimulate thought and discussion and maybe generate some questions for Nigel to take at the end. Stigma exists in a range of ways within our society, not just connected with dementia, but where it is particularly noticeable is when one thinks there is stigma around being old, around mental illness, and indeed around dementia. Usually those with dementia fall into all three categories. And those people termed as having young onset dementia often experience disbelief, mistrust, misunderstanding about their condition and the difficulties that they confront. everyone with dementia is different, and there are many different types of dementia. What, though, is consistent is the progressive nature of the condition and the fact that currently there is no cure available. Consequently, this combination contributes to fear, both from those who are affected and from society generally. Allying to this misconceptions, half-truths, misunderstandings, this is often fueled by a headline-grabbing media which serves to reinforce negative perceptions, which in turn feeds views associated with generating stigma. Fear is, I feel, at the root of the issue. Fear from the person with dementia that their life is changing for the worse and that there are no interventions and/or support to help them to live as well as possible, and that they are somehow to blame for the negative changes in their behavior or their personality. This often provides challenges to loved ones, family and friends, who at times, unbeknown to them often, reinforce the stigma, often unwittingly, by talking about their loved one's decline, their loved one's changes, or the challenging person that they now love, who perhaps in their view is different from before, often without understanding the changes which the person is confronting. Stigma then obstructs the person's ability to continue to make useful contributions to family or broader society. One early casualty in this is the person's self-esteem, which is hard to recover once tipped into a downward mode. Negative labels then are attached at best to the behavior, at worst to the person. Words like sufferer, challenging, demented, all conjure up awful images which can perpetuate negative behaviors. I know from a professional lifetime trying to counter negative labels in children how damaging that can be. Fear then exists when people are encouraged to come forward to seek a diagnosis or indeed to seek support. Yesterday, I was at a young onset conference, Bradford University on Zoom. We were talking about people not signing up for support for young onset groups. One reason being people thought all old people would be there. People don't always know what to say to the person with dementia. Do they feel sorry for them? Do they fear upsetting them? Do they fear an aggressive or challenging response to something they may say or do? The stigma then is internalized, often in both the person with dementia and their loved ones, and then it feeds on itself, leading to someone who previously may have been trying to live well, feeling now depressed, helpless, or socially excluded. All, though, should not be doom and gloom. When I wrote that 10 years ago, I wonder how much has now changed. How much of my view has changed? How much support has changed? How much society has changed? Well, since then, of course, we've had the Prime Minister's Challenge, we've had the Dementia Friends, we've had dementia-friendly communities, we've had DEEP growing in strength and influence. We've had the Three Nations Dementia Working Group that didn't exist when I wrote that talk in 2014. All of that has helped. All of that has made an impact. Has it sorted the problem? No, I don't think so. The problem still exists. And it is down to people on this talk today and in this audience today to help move the agenda forward. Because each day we challenge this agenda, we make inroads, we make some progress. Peer support is increasingly important. Increasingly important. Recently, with Julie's help, Nigel's help, an eminent clinical psychologist and I wrote a book called Talking with Dementia Reconsidered. And that book hopefully will make a contribution towards reducing stigma connected to dementia, because there we spoke to 15 people living with the condition about their lives and about how they cope with many issues in their life, including stigma. And one thing that shone through was peer support. We should never underestimate the importance of that, whether we are a person with dementia or whether we're a family carer, because both need help. Both encounter stigma and both often benefit from peer support to address that. The other thing that we need to do is to ensure that people with dementia are not kept separate, that there is a sense of community and there is a sense of connections to our community. So often people are hived away in care homes, never to see an individual from outside the care home. I feel that's a poor situation to be in. I would hope that care homes would welcome in people to visit, both family, friends, but also outsiders, younger people, children often, who can enrich the lives of those people with dementia. And again, by seeing people with dementia, laughing, speaking, engaging as best as they possibly can, those young people then will help contribute towards reducing stigma in our society, because they will have less fear of dementia. And it's that word that I think is the best ally to stigma. Finally, from me, before I hand over back to Nigel, I think within our society, companies such as banks, travel companies, railways, buses, shops, utilities, they all have a role to play in helping our society and communities be more open to and encouraging to reducing stigma for people living with dementia. Because as I said earlier, often people with dementia are older, often they do have mental health conditions or this horrible phrase, comorbidities. Often they do have special or additional needs that require them to have extra help. And I would ask those companies and those concerns just to be more tolerant and be more understanding and more aware. And then society in 2034 will be less stigma for people with dementia than it was in 2014 or 2024. Back to you, Nigel.
Thank you, Keith. I was particularly interested in your comment about public perceptions and the fear factor of dementia. Surely that's a matter of gaps in education. Do you agree?
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Keith.
Thank you.
Chat box is a bit quiet, so guys, if you've got anything out there that you want to ask us, please put them in the chat box so I can put it to the panelists. The next person we're going to have to talk is Ray. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning. Hello there. My name is Ray. I'm the principal carer for my wife, Helen, who was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia around 12 years ago. We live in Lancashire. Unlike many, we're fortunate to have close family and friends to support us. That includes Singing for the Brains groups that we enjoy. As you're aware, though, today's topic is about perception and stigma. So perception, the way someone thinks or the impression that they have. There are some people who have had no contact with anyone with dementia, and their perception is very simple. People with dementia are just mad, they can't communicate, they can't have a view on anything, and the best situation is just put them in a care home. They think everybody's the same that has dementia. They have no idea as to the variants. Every individual is different and at a different stage. And they're also unaware that people may be in the early stages of dementia and not display much in terms of symptoms. Also, for those who have met someone with dementia, there's little or no tolerance, understanding from a lot of people, and certainly don't make any allowances. They've no idea how to respond to a situation, nor what to expect when they meet somebody who they know has dementia. A typical response is either to avoid direct contact or to communicate via the carer. They're just as bad to shout and talk slowly to the individual. I've seen that countless times. It's just ridiculous. Some people do feel embarrassed as they don't know how to deal with the situation, so they try to avoid it. For example, if someone with dementia and a carer are visiting them at their home to talk to their partners, they may just pop their head around the door and say, "I'm nipping out for a bit," so as to avoid that contact with the person with dementia. Similarly, they may avoid visiting the home of a person with dementia and so lose touch, and hence contributing to the isolation not just of the person with dementia, but the carer as well. Within families, there can be problems with recognising or accepting the situation. In an extreme example, we know the person with dementia who could talk for 15 to 20 minutes, but then go on to repeat the same subject. The carer's siblings would just listen to that first few minutes and say, "Oh, he's no problems," and leave it at that. It's only the carer who saw the true situation. And typically, limited contact can mean it's rejected or at least not accepted. It's only the carer that sees this over time and has to put up with perhaps the comments from the siblings. Care homes, well, there are problems there where the staff don't recognise that the person with dementia is an individual who needs help. They're just a tick in a box. "I need to move on to the next person. I've only so long, get round." For example, they just put food next to the person with dementia, comes back later to take the uneaten food away, not caring that that person may be unable to feed themselves properly and don't really care anyway. And they certainly make little or no attempt to provide any mental stimulation. For example, find out what their preferred music is and put that on. No attempt is made to understand hobbies. They may love to sing or knit, but never given any support to do this, which can further accelerate the cognitive decline. I could go on at length about this because I've had personal experience going into care homes and seeing this, but we'll talk about stigma. So basically, a set of negative or unfair beliefs. The reaction of people to those with dementia varies, but there are lots of negative actions and comments. And here are a few examples that I've experienced myself or aware of via a friend. We were at an operetta concert and Helen started to sing quietly when the orchestra began the overture. The person next to her really kicked off, despite me previously explaining that she had dementia, as she'd been a bit agitated whilst we were waiting, and she kept asking when it would start, so she was delighted that it had actually started. He insisted she either shut up or we should leave. And anyway, she shouldn't have been given entry in her condition. Well, you can imagine my reaction. He made more noise about it than Helen did. So I decided we would leave, as it was very embarrassing. He was a vicar too, so you can imagine how that went down. I know of two examples of where someone with dementia and their carer were not invited to a close family wedding in case they caused a disturbance at the reception. Despite assurances that this was very unlikely that it would happen, and even if it did, the couple could just make the way out, wouldn't cause any problems. Despite this assurance, they were not invited. Even worse, in one instance, the bride was not made aware that an invitation had not been issued, and they just assumed that the couple didn't want to attend, and she was very upset by the perceived slight. So you can imagine how we felt when we heard that. Of course, these are examples at the extreme end of stigma, but everybody has numerous examples of that. Sometimes someone with dementia can use offensive language, exhibit unusual behaviour or be aggressive, which is totally different to their previous character. The carer may be used to this, but obviously this can cause a lot of problems in public. And it's a difficult situation for the carer. For example, it may happen in a church service or around children. But everyone should recognise the situation and be a little tolerant of it. Keith mentioned banks. Well, banks and other institutions automatically assume that anyone diagnosed with dementia is unable to make any decisions, even at early stages, and can demand solicitor involvement, which can be expensive if powers of attorney have not been completed. I even heard this morning from a carer that came in to help us that her father was in hospital after a mild seizure, and the doctor said, "Oh, he has dementia. I'm going to put a do not resuscitate note on his notes." He said, "Well, how can you possibly do?" "Well, he's not up to it. He might as well go." And that was the doctor theoretically looking after him. Well, how would that be? It's just ridiculous. Again, Keith has mentioned media, and this is one of my notes, that they get unhelpful language, demented, a burden on society, dementia sufferer, and also people are portrayed very stereotypical ways on the TV, and that reinforces the stigma, and the discrimination is terrible in some areas. And within many cultures, dementia is seen as a thing to be kept within a family, as it's very shameful. And in others, it's not even recognised as a medical condition. In summary, though, my main observation is that those living with dementia are still people and should be treated with respect. We should think about how we would feel if we were treated like many people with dementia treated, and be more tolerant and helpful. There's no reason why those living with dementia are unable to play an active part in society, either working or as a volunteer, whilst they still can, and can still bring a benefit to the society that everybody should recognise. So thank you for listening to my points.
Ray, that was astonishing. And it brings home the work that we still have to do to break down this fearsome, almost intimidatory way people approach people living with dementia. I mean, the things you've said to me are not unfamiliar. So that makes it even worse. I think the panel will agree that we've all heard these stories before, and it makes it much more worse. All I can say, Ray, is people like you and your constant striving to make sure that your loved one is cared for properly are the way that we're going to make change. Where would you like to start, Ray? If you had a blank check, where would you like to start?
Well, I'd like everybody to understand about that person, how difficult it must be for the person who gets diagnosed. It must be horrendous to have that diagnosis and not know what the future holds, other than it's not going to be an easy life. And the other side of it is, I don't like the way people associated with anyone with dementia pull away and just leave them. So the carer gets little or no support in many instances. So in my wife's case, she's very settled in her way. She's really happy. But if I didn't have support from outside, the family, etc., you feel just locked into the system, and you're just caring for your wife all the time. You've no time for anything else. And you can imagine a lot of people really struggle. So I would like more education, even at school level, that children should be given that opportunity to meet up with someone who is living with dementia, to see how to react to them. So it's such a difficult subject.
Yeah, I mean, I think intergenerational work may very well be the silver bullet for stigma, because children are an open book, and all the examples I've seen of children engaging with people in things like care homes have been very, very positive on both ends of the side. Mm-hmm. Thank you. There's a few questions that popped in. I'll refer to them as we go along, but that's very powerful, Ray, and thank you so much for sharing with us. I think, plus the people on the panel, plus the participants out here, wouldn't fail to be moved by the kinds of things that you said. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, much of it is very familiar to us. We've heard it, we've heard it before, which means that there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ray. And I now to Julie Hayden. Morning, Julie.
Morning there.
How are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Nigel.
Good.
My name is Julie Hayden, and I'm calling in from Halifax. And I have been living with dementia diagnosis since 2017, and try to basically get involved in as much advocacy work as I can, this country and abroad, and also get involved in as much research as possible. All types of stigma are deep-rooted in our societies. These occur as a result of our upbringing, culture, and exposure to the values of others. Many just live in ignorance of the plain, realistic facts. Even across the professions, there are those who do not open-mindedly update themselves on the validity of the perceived facts. As a result, we risk falling back on those ingrained ideas of what's known about dementia. So much has come to light through the lens of research to demonstrate that, contrary to the opinions of 30 years ago, such as that dementia is not a disease restricted purely to the elderly, that it's not a mental illness but a neurological disorder, and that if we give the appropriate support and enablement, we can live productively and with quality for far longer than the prognosed 5 years that many of us were given. In their defence, those working within health and social care, on whom we come to for professional assistance, are not trained in a manner in which they are provided with the right tools for the job. Instead, they are expected to source their own deeper knowledge base in their own time, outside having to manage a busy workload. The impact of this on the impression for the wider public is major. This needs to be addressed. It's also vital that those working in the voluntary sector are mindful of the need to, at all times, offer positivity and realistic hope in all their public messages and campaigns, which offer realistic ways for people to live well with their dementias, promoting positive images in order to counter stigma rather than add to it. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt you. Such a false maxim, as inappropriate vocabulary can be incredibly damaging in so many ways. Due to the high level of stigma that continues to exist, many people still find it difficult to share their diagnosis with others and even to reach out for help. Many are frustrated with the agonisingly slow progress of changing societal attitudes. Yet there has been progress, and we must look at ways to accelerate this. In this way, we can ensure a fairer, smoother path for those yet to receive their diagnosis and their families, the next generation. We can start by bringing the topics relating to dementia into the open rather than being something to avoid. We can normalise it. When I was young, people still referred to cancer as the big C. So let's send hushed tone references to the big D and fully incorporate the use and promote the value of dementia voices. We are just part of life's rich pattern of the range of human experience. We are already making inroads into schools, but why not incorporate dementia discussions as part of health education? We need to increase the voices of those living in communities where there is an extra cultural stigma around dementia, and so have less appropriate access to professions. For example, those living in the BAME and LGBTQ plus communities. Everyone needs to work together in order to achieve this, always with lived experience at the centre. Thank you.
Julie, can I just say I spent 3 days with you at ADI conference. Just a second, Kath, can you put your camera off? Camera's on, Kath.
My camera's on?
No, Kath. Carry on. I spent 3 days at an ADI with Julie, and I thought I knew all there was to know about discrimination until I actually travelled around central London with Julie, and I learned through her direction the way she dealt with people that didn't treat her as they started talking to Julie, not me, and that really didn't go down well, Julie, did it? And it was as if everything was centered around the able-bodied person, not anyone else. And for some reason that I was Julie's spokesperson, when Julie, obviously speaks better for herself than I ever could. And I learned an awful lot from from that. Julie, do you think we're winning?
I think like I said, there is progression towards achieving some battles along the way, but that progress has been so incredibly and painfully slow that I think for a lot of people who have been working really hard in dementia advocacy for a hell of a lot longer than I have, look around themselves and say, but we were saying this 20 years ago, which is similar to what Keith was saying. And where's the difference? Why are we still having to say the same things? But I think we have to kind of try and keep a balance ourselves, and it's not good enough that there's still so much fight to go, but just recognise that there have been major advances by people like Keith, who started way back in 2010, leading the way, and the effect that their work has had. And all we can do is build on it and look for ways to sort of find an accelerator to put ways of pushing forward those important points, such as that we've already touched on about starting education right from people with dementia going into schools. The Society ran a brilliant ad years ago involving our very own Joey Watson, which was a multi-generational one about people with dementia having discussions with children. And Joy has done an awful lot of work about going into schools and having those conversations with children. And so withdrawing that fear that might exist about how do I approach someone with dementia.
Yeah, Melvin has put in the chat, Melvin Brooks, that he thinks that schools should be offered the opportunity to come and see these Zooms work. Do you think that's a good idea?
Yes, very much.
I do as well.
And also the fact that, of course, for professionals, I mean, if you look back to the way doctors are trained, there is barely no mention of dementia, let alone up to date, using the research that's been gathered over the last few decades. There's no actual dementia training, and that should certainly be in place and should be there involving us, showing the realities of living with dementia. Because just recently, when I was speaking to my GP, I was actually laughed at and told that if I'd had a diagnosis 5 years ago, I'd be dead by now.
Yeah, I get that all the time. Yeah. Thank you, Julie. You've certainly made us think. And our next speaker is Natalie Elliott. Morning, Natalie. How are you?
Good morning, Nigel.
If you'd like to briefly introduce yourself to everybody, and then
I will do. Thank you, Nigel. So good morning, everyone. My name's Natalie Elliott. I'm really grateful to have been invited to come along as a panelist to this session today. I'm here from Wales, and my role is that I'm the National Allied Health Professional Lead for Dementia in Wales, which is a bit of a mouthful. But what that means is that I work with and for a range of different professionals that come under the umbrella of allied health in Wales. Depending where you live in the UK, it's a slightly different set of professions that are under that umbrella. In Wales, we have 14 professions, and you can see behind me that there's some sort of little people that represent each of those professions. And they include some of the common ones that will be across all of the UK are things like occupational therapy, physiotherapy, dietitians, speech and language therapists, and there's many others. And if you'd like to find out a bit more about that, I am going to add a couple of links into the chat when I finished speaking. But I just wanted to start by saying how helpful it was to hear from the other panelists, from myself as well. So thank you to everyone for sharing your experiences and those of people that you know. And it's just so powerful when we really hear about those experiences, and so important for us to listen and to understand what those experiences are, so that we can look forward and look to you know, improve things. Now, I'm very grateful to be here. I actually wasn't aware I had a whole 10 minutes to talk, so I'm afraid I am talking off the cuff, but I'm going to use this opportunity, hopefully in a helpful way, to talk to you a bit about what we're doing in Wales and my role. But I also wanted to mention about the World Alzheimer's report that was recently launched on the 21st of September, because that was specifically looking at globally this topic of stigma. And I think there's lots in there that's really important for us to be sort of considering. But one of the big things that stood out to me is that there's still a huge proportion, and this is globally, so we're not just looking at people in the UK, and things will differ in different countries, but there's still a huge proportion of people in the general population. So in the report, it's 80% of people who were involved in the survey in the general population still think dementia is part of normal aging processes. And equally important and a high number is that 65% of health professionals globally who took part in the survey also believe that dementia is a part of the normal aging process. So just starting from there, I think it says a lot about some of the things that other members on the panel have discussed today about our need to do a lot more education around what dementia is, and you know, how that can be supported, but that actually, no, this is not a part of the normal aging process is key. The other thing for me that I really think of when I think about stigma and perception, there's lots of aspects to this, but for me as an allied health professional, it's about the misunderstanding and the culture shift that we need to make around people living with dementia accessing the same care and support when it comes to services that are around rehabilitation. So vitally important that people are seeking a diagnosis and getting a diagnosis if that's something that they want. But equally important is then what happens next and how that person is supported afterwards. And whilst I like to think we've made progress in the UK and in Wales on people living with dementia accessing improved support to rehabilitation and the skills of the allied health professions in that sphere, you know, we know that still has room for improvement, and that there's still work to be done to educate the workforce on those that are not working in sort of dementia specialist roles, but yet are still going to be working with people living with dementia, on how to continue to provide the same access, the same support to those services to people with a dementia diagnosis as they would to anybody else. but also ensuring that people living with dementia know about our services and know about what we do as allied health professions. In Wales, we did a big piece of work a couple of years ago now on co-producing a framework for the allied health professions for Wales, for dementia specifically. And I'll put a link to this in the chat, but this was co-produced. We had voices of people living with dementia involved in the steering group, and that also includes carers of people living with dementia. And it set out some priorities, areas of action that we need to improve on and need to address. And one of those is about access to and awareness of what the allied health professions can provide. So that's really, really key. And we are doing work in Wales on, producing improved resources and information about what we do, and helping people to have easier access to our services. There is some excellent work that I always am inspired by that has been done in Scotland. So I'll also put in the chat a link to an excellent website that's full of some fantastic resources that we are working towards in Wales, having something similar. So we're looking to have a web platform that will also have a range of resources that are easily available to members of the public about the different allied health professions and the way that we can support people living with dementia, and the things as well that are helpful information for anyone living with dementia, or if you know someone living with dementia, to be able to know. So you don't always need to actually see us to be able to gather some information that can help you and support you. So some of those resources are there designed to be sort of empowering and hopefully helpful in that area too. How am I doing for time, Nigel?
Two more minutes, yeah, fine.
Yeah, because I'm happy to pause and take some questions as well.
Okay.
But yeah, so I think, just as opposed to summarize, is just to say that we are also fortunate as well in Wales. The other thing to say is that in my role, we have developed a national network of allied health professionals. So the network is has around 300 members now. It's been growing steadily since I set this up a few years ago. And the idea of that is to bring together anybody who has an interest in dementia. So this is not just aimed at people who are working in a role that is seen as like a dementia specialist role, understanding the fact that actually many people who are working in this field will be working with people living with dementia and need to develop their skills and knowledge. And one of the things that the network does is bring people together to share practice that's happening across Wales, to talk about some of the challenges as well. And we also invite and very much welcome people with lived experience to that group. And we've done some brilliant work with Nigel and some of our other members as a consequence of that. And we have different topics when we meet. We meet quarterly that we focus on. And we also have a newsletter which is shared out that provides us with another method of communication to showcase some of the work that's happening in Wales and hopefully to improve equity of access as well. So I think that's one of the other key things, is that we do have differences unfortunately in services that are available in different locations. So by using this as a platform to be able to share some excellent work that might be happening in one region, so that hopefully we can scale that up and support that good practice being available everywhere then.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you so much. You and I work closely for a number of years now, not just you and I, obviously, with other people, but it's fair to say that that the AHP groups, the work that they do, be they occupational therapists, speech and language, physio, whatever, when they get there, have a lot more impact than, shall we say, other professions who are not allied to AHP, because it's a hands-on approach. One question I want to ask you, just briefly, is do you think there's too much siloing goes on about people's skills and what they're producing? Are we sharing enough?
So I think, Nigel, I think there's always more that we can do there. And I think actually one of the things that thinking about allied health professions as a group, because that's 14 professions, I think that one of the things that's challenging, covering 14 different professions, but one of the things that is a positive about that is actually we are looking at what's our common approach and our common language. Where can we, work together and support people in that way? So as you're saying there, Nigel, we're avoiding as much as possible that siloed way of working, looking at where our skills are shared. There's always going to be within that those very specific, very specialist aspects, but actually there's a lot that runs across. So I think that by bringing groups together like that to share and learn from each other. So some of the work that's happening in Wales that we share through the network may be quite profession specific. So it might be something that an occupational therapist has done. I'm thinking of a piece of work at the moment, but actually can easily be transferred. The principle of it easily transferred across other professions. And so we can learn from that approach a lot. The other thing actually, because I'm talking off the cuff and I I haven't sort of pre-prepared this, that I would like to say about stigma is that people living with dementia really do benefit from early support from allied health professionals. There's a lot that we can do to support people who might even have a diagnosis, perhaps not of dementia, but of mild cognitive impairment, to reduce their risk of that progressing, but also to provide skills to look at rehabilitation and support that will affect the progression. And when we've looked at this in Wales, we hear a lot from professionals who say, unfortunately, a lot of our referrals that we get from colleagues are quite late on that we're thought about. So somebody's got more sort of advanced and we're sort of crisis managing, for want of a better word. So we're supporting people at a point where they really need us, they really need that help. But actually part of our work as allied health professionals in Wales and wider is about helping people to know that there's a lot we can do earlier on and not to wait until something's gone wrong. Actually, that seeing us and getting that support early is really beneficial.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Keith.
Natalie, that is amazing, because as you were speaking, I was writing a question to you exactly along those lines. I wrote down versus crisis management.
Yes.
And it's interesting because my question to you is based on some personal experience. 2024 has been quite a difficult year for me health-wise with dementia and other stuff. And the GP has become much more proactive in my support. And he tried to commission for me a speech and language therapy appointment to help me with eating difficulties I have, not with talking, but with eating. And also an OT appointment to try and get some more assistance within my home. The OT worked fine. They came out, they brought out some kit, some of which wasn't required yet. So they took it back, but I know it's there if ever I need to call them back again. Some kit they did leave, which is really useful in reducing my self-stigma feeling around how I'm not coping. They also discharged me then, but said, you know, if you need us, here's where we are. Speech and language, however, rejected the application from the GP because I have dementia. I was then asked to speak at UCL to a speech and language therapy conference, and I mentioned this, and they were not at all surprised. I then went back to the GP and he kicked up a real stink, and I've now got an appointment, but it was 16 to 17 weeks in the waiting. I just want to know your thoughts on that sort of experience, if you like, and how that experience can, in fact, resound my sense of stigma, and my wife's connected to me as well.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you so much for sharing that story, that experience. You know, I'm really sorry. I'm really pleased that you had a good experience with occupational therapy, and I'm really sorry to hear that it wasn't the same with the speech and language therapy service. And that, you know, there's a few things there, isn't there? But that makes me think about what we just discussed about how we can learn and share that knowledge across professions, because if it works in one, it should work in another. And in another area, you know, if you lived in another area and had been referred to another speech and language therapy department, I'd like to think that that wouldn't have been your experience. And there's something that's gone wrong there with that. Maybe their criteria for whether they accept or don't accept a referral. And I think that that is a problem across health, that sometimes there are criteria as to when, you know, when a referral should be accepted or not. I know the team, so before being in the role that I'm in now, I've worked as I am a speech and language therapist actually by profession. Which, you know, is incidental really, but I worked in a memory assessment specialist team in Wales, and we would have accepted any referral. So we, you know, if there was a concern, we would have seen that person to check that concern out before making a decision whether it was you know, appropriate referral or not is sometimes the term used. So I think there's a lot that we need to do still about this issue that you've raised, and I think it doesn't just apply to specific professions. I think it's across health and social care, that sometimes as a way of kind of managing waiting lists and managing kind of services, that they do have some criteria around, but to say that because of a specific diagnosis you're not suitable for a service is shocking.
The word dementia was the barrier to access.
Yes.
And it shouldn't be, but
no,
thank you for explaining.
Absolutely should not be happening. And I'm glad that you have a good GP that's got that sorted for you. But I'm, you know, I'm really sorry to hear that you had that experience.
Thank you.
Well, we're fast running out of time. Ray, I've got an email here from Anne-Marie Norris, who wants to pass on her thanks for you so eloquently expressing your concerns. She relates to all of them and understands them, and she thinks that many people should hear what you have to say. And I can only echo that. All that remains, there's a question from, let's have a look if I can get it up. Question from Anna Rourke. Good morning, everyone. Lovely to see you. What, as an advisor, would you ask that my main message would be in a word that I could use when out and about in my everyday work life? Well, and I think hope is one. I don't know if anybody in the panel's got an idea, but I think hope is one. I think it's very, very important. Tolerance. Yeah. Thank you, panelists. Thank you so much for this morning. We run out of time, as you, and just to remind you that we're doing this all next month again, but the subject will be driving and transport and all issues like that. So keep an eye out for the shout out. Can I ask all the participants to log off, and if the panelists can hang around for 2-3 minutes, I'd be grateful. Have a good day. Goodbye, everybody.
Right.